All right. Welcome everybody to Booksmart Lesson 4, discussing Halachah, Jewish law. I just want to start off with a story. So, just speaking about the law, one time there was a child, which he's on the beach with his family, and the black flag is up, indicating that there are sharks and no one should swim in the water. The boy really wants to go swimming, and his mom tells him, you are not allowed to go swimming. He is holding him back, says he cannot go swimming, and he's very upset. And that's that. A bit 15-20 minutes later, after this whole tantrum the kid has, his dad takes off his shirt and starts walking towards the water and jumps into the ocean. So the kid goes running to his mom and says, "Mom, are you not stopping Dad from going to the ocean because he's big and he can fight the sharks?" So the mom responded and said, "No, I'm not stopping him because your dad has life insurance." All right.
That's Halachah.
All right. That is not Halachah. So what is Halachah? So Halachah actually means the path, the pathway. That would be the translation of halakha. So what is halakha? What exactly is it? So I want to go through this course is to be split into two parts. Those which have the student book, we're holding on page 148. I'm going to try to split this course, this class, into two sections. Number one, we will focus on what halakha, how halakha came to be, the code of Jewish law, the evolution, because it's a whole process. How do we get from the Talmud, which we spoke about last week, to halakha, what we're speaking about today, which is an evolving body, and how someone could relevantly become part of the body, and how some opinions get cast aside. That will be all discussed in part one. And then part two, we are going to take a certain principle in Jewish law and bring it through how we can learn out through that principle, how you can bring that into Jewish law and bring out many different ideas throughout Jewish law. So over here is our map. So you see the halacha goes through the number 4, or right there, which the halachic period really starts from, one second, what is it telling us here? Okay, so we're going to be discussing halacha period starts from the time of, all this really starts from the time of the Mishnah, which is putting us in about 300 BCE, and let us begin. So,
Halachah before the Mishnah?
yes, I'm going to get through everything. Regarding the slideshow, I am really, the first half of the class, I'm really not going to use it much because I'm going off script. All right, so let us begin. So halacha starts off, if you remember, when we spoke last week, we discussed the Talmud, and we discussed the Talmud and the Mishnah. So we said that before the Mishnah, the Mishnaic era, Judaism was Sanhedrin based. So there was no minority opinion. The majority opinion was kept. Minority opinion was discarded of. Then the Sanhedrin gets disbanded. This is the Supreme Court. So now, after the disbandment of the Sanhedrin, there is a need to transcribe everything, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda, the prince, he writes the first code. He writes the first code, and he writes the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a code in the sense that he brings all the opinions of everything, and there are mechanisms to know what is the law as a result of that code. So sometimes, very rare, you will say, very rarely, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he will say the halacha is like someone specific, but usually, the second opinion, if there's ever two opinions, the halacha, the law goes with the second opinion because there is a principle in Hebrew. It's called basar basra, which we'll get into later. It means you go like the later opinion. The reason for that being, if two rabbis lived in the same era, one of them a bit later than the second one, if the later one argues with the earlier one, he probably had more information because through the passage of time, information gets more expansive. So the later rabbi probably has more information than the first rabbi. So if he argues on the earlier rabbi, this is within his time frame, his time period, then we'll go like the later rabbi because he probably had more information and he was better informed. That's why he made that decision. So there are ways within the Mishnah to get through it is a code to get through the halacha. And that's why the Mishnah was made. It was made for people. It was written down in order to be a code. It was written down in order that there could be one just book that all Jews have, and this is the law, and that's it. Then comes the Talmud. The Talmud is a commentary. It's a commentary on the Mishnah. So what's a commentary? There's a lot of discussion. The Talmud is never intended to be a code. Talmud will give you 18 theoreticals based on the Mishnah, and what would be the case for that? So that's not a code of Jewish law. That's more discussion. Then there are certain books throughout history called, so those are two, I'm just going to break down, that is two types of books you have throughout history. One is a code of Jewish law, then you have the commentary. You have number 3, which would be a responsa, which I'm going to go throughout history, how this all worked. A responsa would be that, which let's show that for a minute. Let's go back to the Talmud. So the Talmud ends up being on the original code of Jewish law, the Talmud ends up being the commentary. So that's after the era of the Talmud. There's a buffer zone of about 50 years. This buffer zone is the compilation of the Talmud, and it becoming the bedrock of Jewish society. And then starts an era called the Gaonim. So the Gaonim, they wrote most of their texts in Arabic. Most of the Jewish people at the time lived in Iraq, lived in Babylon, and they were there before the Arabs, talking about returning stolen land. We were there first, just kidding. They were in Iraq, and then there was a yeshiva in Pumbedisa, which one of the cities, I think it's still called Pumbedisa or something similar there today. The yeshiva there lasted north of 800 years, consecutive. Yeah. No, and it's a city called Pumbedisa. So during the Gaonim period, there is Babylonia is falling apart because there's a lot of conflict, and Jews are starting to get spread out everywhere, which we'll get into. And then starts the era of the Rishonim. So within the era of the Rishonim means the first ones. There was a rabbi. When it comes to Jewish law, this is a big person. There's a rabbi called the Rif. The Rif realized something. He realized it's impossible to, when you're learning Torah, learning Talmud, so you had the Mishnah is a code, but it's so much more expansive throughout the Talmud. So now, how are you supposed to take that and learn how to live your life? No one's going to go through all of the commentary from the beginning of the Talmud and go through everything to figure out all the details. So the Rif, his name is Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. He lived in the city of Fez, Morocco. And he comes up with a plan how to make the Talmud simple. So he wrote a book, what some people call the miniature Talmud. And so right here, I just want to show you. So I have all the books I'm going to be talking about, I'm sitting with. So right here is my Talmud, what we showed you last week. So this is how a normal page of Talmud looks. Now, I'm going to show you a page of the Rif. The Rif, yes. Let's find them. Right here is how the Rif looks. Pretty much looks like your Talmud.
Same thing.
Looks like the same thing. So nowadays it's found within you buy a set of Talmud, it'll be found in the back. It used to be printed separately because people didn't have money for both necessarily at the same time. So you brought a tractate of Talmud, you got just the Talmud, you could buy a set of Rif. Just
the Rif younger
than the Talmud. He lives in the end of the Gaonic era, which is he's about 1,000 years ago.
And what does Rif stand for? Is that
Rabbi Yitzchak of Fez. So he writes, that's called a digest. It's the spark notes of the Talmud. He takes almost none of his own writing. He has a little bit. This one doesn't, this Talmud I own doesn't have it. Some Talmuds actually will highlight when he writes his own words. He didn't really write much. He just wrote the laws. What is the bottom line of the Talmud? So he deletes, let's say 9/10 of the Talmud, and he comes up with a digest of spark notes of the Jewish law. So there was someone in the time, his name was Rabbi Zrachia Halevi. He was 19 years old, and he wasn't going to have any of this. So he wrote a book called the Ma'or. His book was called the Ma'or, and he asked questions on the Rif. This is a 19-year-old kid. The Rif is the leader of the generation. A 19-year-old kid writes a book refuting a lot of times the Rif says such and such is a law in his digest. There's 4 opinions. He'll choose an opinion and say this is the law. Rabbi Zerachi Halevi argues with him. Then comes a sage later on. I'm sure you all heard of him. His name was the Ramban, the Nachmanides. He writes a book called Milchemes Hashem, the God's battle, God's war, and he answers all the questions. The Ramban, Nachmanides, he lived a lot after the Rif. He was not a student, but he considered himself like a spiritual student, and he writes a book answering most of the questions that Rabbi Zerachi Halevi has. And so that is a type of book that's called a digest of Talmud. So that was the first code. So it's not a code, it was a digest of the Talmud. What's the problem with that? The problem is, it's great. You have the whole Jewish law in one space. And it's only law, there's no other. All discussions taken out, it's just the law the way it is. The problem is, how do you know where to look? The Talmud, because it's a commentary, it's really all over the place. For instance, just the way the Mishnah was made, there is a Masechta, a tractate of Talmud called Kiddushin. Kiddushin speaks about getting married. Part of getting married, you write a ksuba, you write a contract. So all of a sudden it gets into contracts. So now there's a whole bunch of laws of Jewish contract law, which finds itself within the middle of tractate of Kiddushin. So for someone who's learned, he knows, great, I'm going to look in Kiddushin because I have a question. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not there. He knows a few places to look. But then comes a simple Jew. This simple Jew, he says, my dad did not teach me Talmud. I didn't go to yeshiva. I have a question. Where do I look? So he doesn't know where to look in the Rif because it was just a digest. It was written within the order of the Talmud. So the Rif lives a very long life. He lived to his 90s. When he passed away, he had a son, was a very big sage as well. His son was a young man in his 70s, and everyone was expecting for him to give over the academy to his son, but instead he gives the yeshiva over to someone by the name of the Ri Megash. The
So the son drops out of the picture. He
So-
doesn't-
yeah. And this Rabbi Gash was a man, he was 28 years old. He gives it over to him. Maimonides considered himself a student of the Rabbi Gash. Maimonides himself was not a student of the Rabbi Gash. Rather, Maimonides' father, Rabbi Maimon, was a student of the Rabbi Gash, and the Rambam, Maimonides, was a student of his father. And he considered himself a spiritual student of the Rabbi Gash. And a lot of times Maimonides will refer to him as such. So we have, this is the first digest. So this is actually not the first digest. So there's the Gaonic period, which I said earlier. A lot of it was written in Arabic. They're writings. That's why most of it we don't have, because it was never translated properly. And then Jews stopped speaking Arabic, and then never got translated and just got lost. But there were digests at the time as well that were written, but they're not. The Rif is the first major digest, which is very famous within Jewish law. So then comes Maimonides. Unfortunately, I didn't have, in my house, I have a set of Maimonides, but I didn't have the proper book. So I don't have to show it with me. Maimonides does something revolutionary. He decides that he is going to take Jewish law, and he's going to be the first one to make a code in Jewish law, of just Jewish law, nothing else, and in order, not in the order of the Talmud. He's going to have books. He splits it up into 14 books. Book 1 is called Mada. These are all the mitzvahs that have to do with our hearts. For instance, or our heads. For instance, to believe in God is a mitzvah. So that's in the first book. You want to know this, the mitzvah, what it entails to believe in God. You have to check out Maimonides' first book. You want to know about marriage? He has a book called Nashim, which means women. It's all the laws about women are found in there. If you want to know how to get married, go to that book. He has the first part of the book is the first part of the book deals with that. You want to know how to get divorced? That's the next section. The next section of the book. Your friend messed you over in a contract. There's a daily study program of Maimonides. So right now we're actually dealing with that. We just actually finished yesterday. There's the book of acquiring, the laws of buying and selling. Go over there. So Maimonides makes this compilation. He wrote it in Hebrew. It's actually his only work he wrote in Hebrew. The rest he wrote in Arabic, and he told people, because he felt very important that the whole entire Jewish people uses this to know the Jewish law. And he actually writes in his introduction, he says something very interesting. He calls it the Mishnah Torah, which means Deuteronomy, which means the repetition of Torah. He says this is the repetition of Torah because after I write this, no one will need the Talmud anymore. You'll be able to just learn scripture and go straight to my book, skip out the Talmud, you know exactly what to do. So there was one problem with Maimonides. He doesn't write any sources. And there's actually a story that one time he someone came and asked him a question about something he wrote and wanted to know what the source was. So he gave an answer. That person checked it up and said, "Oh, it wasn't it." So he thought maybe it's somewhere else. And it wasn't the right place either. And the person left empty-handed. And as the person left, he remembers that it was in like some obscure place of the Talmud that spoke about it, and that was his source. But it was already too late, and he couldn't run after the person, and he couldn't tell him. And at that point, he regretted that he didn't write his sources, and he wanted to work on that. In the end, he never did. And other opinions work on it, but he has no sources. So Maimonides writes his book. It's meant to be the last book of Jewish law. This is it, and that's all. Keep on going. There's a problem. Since he didn't write his sources, Jews don't know how to follow, aren't willing to follow. In Judaism in general, this is something very interesting, very important. There is no such thing as a chief rabbi. What do I mean by that? So there is a chief rabbi of Israel. There is a chief rabbi of Israel or any other country, but there's no such thing as a chief rabbi, meaning that no one rabbi has authority over another rabbi. Rabbis have, since the Sanhedrin, the high court, has been disbanded, Judaism is not centralized. So if you have a question, you go to your rabbi and you ask him, and he'll give you an answer. So Maimonides tries making Judaism centralized. The problem is no one's going to listen to him. The rabbis of his time, none of them are going to listen to him unless they have no one rabbi's listen unless they have the sources. And since they have the sources, it ends up being this massive discussion. Ironically, Maimonides is the one book aside from the Talmud that has the most commentary on it, on any other book. This is meant to be the final book, and it has the most commentary of any other book. So Maimonides writes his code. And then a little bit later comes a rabbi named the Rosh. The Rosh lives in the end of this era of the Rishonim, which means the first, after there's a Gaonim, the Gaonic period, then there's the Rishonim period. The Rosh writes another digest of the Talmud. So there's a major difference in how the Sephardi rabbis learn and how the Ashkenazi rabbis learn. At this point, there's a major split in Judaism. There are the Ashkenazi Jews, which are living in Christian occupied countries, have a lot of autonomy to communicate with each other. You have the Sephardi Jews living in Muslim enemy territory, Muslim occupied countries, have a lot of autonomy to communicate with each other. So what happens? A rabbi has a certain question comes up in a certain community. The rabbi doesn't know the answer, so he's going to send out he'll send out the question to another rabbi, and you have all these rabbis communicating with each other. For all we know, there's these conferences going on, all these rabbis discussing all the different questions, but there's slowly but surely there is a split happening within Judaism, because you have Sephardi rabbis answering questions in their own way, and then you have these massive communities all parroting each other. And one rabbi says, "Thus such you should do," and they respected that rabbi. Jews respected him, so they continue. You have Ashkenazi rabbis telling Jews to do something else, and also Sephardi and Ashkenazi personality traits are very different, very possibly because of where they live. The Sephardim are very pro-code. They love having code. They love knowing exactly what to do. The Ashkenazi communities love autonomy. So they don't want any one rabbi saying, this is how you do in this case, you want to do in that case. Because as I said, once we don't have a high court, Halachah is really, the Torah is left to us to understand. The last part of Torah, which every single Jew, there's a common consensus, is the Talmud. So you could take the Talmud and you understand it. And now I could come up and say, you know what? I can extrapolate from the Talmud that you're allowed to eat a cheeseburger. I'll get laughed out. If I don't have a great source, I'll get laughed out of the ballpark. Nobody cares. Like, I won't be anything. So what ends up happening is, who gets status? Who do we still remember are the rabbis which had status because their opinions are widely accepted. They wrote it down. So in the Ashkenazi circles, you have Rashi. He writes down a commentary on the Talmud. Through how he writes, you're able to see what his halachic understanding of certain things was. You have Tosafot. Tosafot is a whole back and forth way of learning the Talmud, making comparisons and bringing out different things. And you have this whole Ashkenazic way of learning, which is not written in any code, and it's not really being encompassed. Maimonides doesn't really have access to it. The Rif was actually a little before the time, actually about the same time as Rashi. But so you have this all going on. So the Rosh lives at the end of this era. So the Rosh was a hybrid. Why was he a hybrid? He was a student of someone named the Maharam from Rothenburg. Rothenburg is sitting in Germany. Basically, the king of Germany arrests the Ram from Rothenburg, and he wants the Jews to pay 20,000 marks to release him. And the Maharam from Rothenburg, he says as follows. He says, if you guys pay the ransom and you release me, they're gonna arrest the next guy. It's better you just don't release me. Keep me as is. So he ends up sitting in prison, I think, for 14 years, and he dies. And then they have to wait another 12 years before they could get his body. So the Rosh was his student. The Rosh realized, one second, I'm gonna finish this. And the Rosh realizes he's next. So he runs away to Spain. So, and that's when, and they realize he's a great rabbi. And so they elevate him, they make him a rabbi of the academy. So the Rosh is in the back of the Talmud right here. It says Rabbeinu Asher. The acronym for that is the Rosh. He writes another digest of the Talmud. The difference of him is he includes all the Ashkenazi rulings from Tosafot, Rashi, and other Ashkenazi rabbis of the time. So he is a hybrid. All right, let me take questions if anyone has. Yes.
Is the Rosh Ashkenaz?
The Rosh was born Ashkenazi, and then he moves to Spain to run away from the Germans. He moves to the Sephardi community.
So then he wrote as a Sephardi.
Yeah, that's probably why he wrote a digest, which was more of a Sephardic thing to do. But he added all the Ashkenazi rabbis, which he had access to all of that information.
But with the Ashkenazim rabbis didn't agree with each other either.
Correct. But then,
I mean, right down to today.
yeah, I'm gonna get into that.
Even within the Hasidic movement, they're all fighting.
Yeah, so let me get into all that. Hasidic movement's different because that's not halachic. That's not about halachic. It's not about halachic rulings at all. So that'd be a whole nother discussion. Any questions in Zoom?
What does Rosh stand for?
Rabbi Usher.
Rabbi Asher?
Yeah.
I have
Yes.
a question, Dovid.
Yes.
On this slide and other slides and other discussions, it talks about the Talmud and Midrash filled with moral and philosophical teachings. Isn't Midrash part of the Talmud? Why do you separate it out? Why do they talk separately about it?
So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just stuck on this slide, by the way.
It's okay.
It's just that I'm really off script, and I wasn't sure. I deleted actually a lot of the slides, but I wasn't sure how to continue deleting. So I just figured let's not use it just in case I want something. Actually, this slide I want right now. Okay, so basically the Midrash is a way of learning over the Talmud is one way of learning, the Midrash is another one. So you have a lot of Midrash in the Talmud, but they're actually separate because two ways of learning Torah.
So Midrash
Does that
is
make sense?
just a way of learning. It's not really a separate.
It's not necessarily a book. Correct.
But is there a book of Midrashic teachings or?
Yes, there is a book it's called, the biggest book is called the Midrash Rabbah, the Great Midrash. But then there's a lot of other ones, but the book actually, ironically, with the most Midrash within it is the Talmud.
Okay.
All right. So what happens is, by the way, a really great page to turn to. A really great page to turn to is 158. It's color coded. So basically what happens is, so we spoke about Maimonides having a code, then there's digest. That's pretty much what we've been talking about. Now, with those two things, you have something called, and then there's a third thing called responsa. What happens? I'll give you just a good example of, and we spoke about commentaries. We didn't speak about responsa yet. So let me speak about responsa, and then I'll get back into the history of the Jewish law. Basically, I'm going to skip a bit. So what blessing do we make on donuts? Anyone? What bracha would you make on a donut?
As opposed to other types.
As opposed
Sure.
to
The shakal?
not a motzi, not chakol.
Not shakal.
Borei minei mizonot.
I mean, doesn't know.
And mizonot is what we make on stuff made out of wheat, which are not made for meals. But there's actually in Jewish law, there is an amount how much you need to eat. But donuts will always, sometimes you could eat too many pretzels and have to make hamotzi, by the way. But with donuts, you'll always have to make mizonot. So that sounds pretty straightforward, right? So actually look at this right here. So all this, I'm not expecting you to be able to read this, but I'm not expecting anyone to read this and even understand it. This is just a rabbi, which he wrote an article about. He writes an article about donuts on Hanukkah. So he writes all of his sources. So this is just him extrapolating the sources why a donut will always have that bracha. So that's called responsa, because if a rabbi, how did rabbis become famous, and why are they generational rabbis? It's because they wrote responsas. They had an answer. Someone asked them a question, a halachic question. They would answer it and explain why. They would say the halacha, they would say the answer, but then they would write it down and explain why they got to that answer. So the one of the responsa I've learned a lot was the third Chabad Rabbi. He was also one of the leading authorities in Russia, the Tzemach Tzedek. So he had a responsa called Tzemach Tzedek. He's named after that. And he would get a lot of questions. There's a lot at that time. There was a big deal of husbands running away from their wives and disappearing, and then the wives couldn't get remarried because they never got legally divorced. And he has a lot of questions like that. So he would answer the question, but then he would write down how he got to that, how with this scenario, and he would get through his whole thought process throughout that. So that's responsa. So you have that's going on throughout history. And a lot of us getting the code which we have today is based on the responses. So the code of Jewish law is ever growing. Let's go back to the history. So now you have the Rosh. The Rosh writes his digest. Comes his son, right over here. I have a book called the Torah and Shulchan Aruch. So the Torah, he is the Rosh's son. He writes a book. The Torah is. He writes a book called the Arba Turim, which means the 4 sections. He splits Judaism in 4 sections. He differs from Maimonides. Maimonides discusses everything in Judaism, even what's not relevant. The Torah only discusses what's relevant in modern day Halachah. So he's not going to speak about the temple. And he splits it into 4 sections. The first book is called Orach Chaim, which is anything of our day-to-day lives. Everything's in that first book. Second book is Yoradea, which I'm holding here, which is anything about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do in regards to food, for instance. This I have in my house because this is from when you learn Smicha. It's the laws of kosher over here. He writes, that's the second book. Third book is Even Ezer, which is all discussions about marriage, divorce is all in that book. Fourth book is called Choshen Mishpat, which is everything about money. You ever have an argument with your neighbor about money, you could find it in Choshen Mishpat. So the Torah looks like this on the inside. So in the middle is the Torah. He brings down everything. Most opinions are brought down here from the Talmud, most opinions from the era of the Rishonim is brought down over here, and it has everything in it. So now he writes a code, but it's still not clear who is the halacha like, who is the law like. So comes a man, his name is the Beis Yosef. He writes, his name is Rabbi Yosef Cairo. He's born in Spain, he moves to Tzfat. He lives in Israel, in Tzfat, and he starts writing a code. So what he starts doing is, he starts writing a commentary. So the Beit Yosef is right here, all this is him. He starts writing a commentary called the Beit Yosef on the Torah, and he's going to tell us what is the halacha, what is the law like. So what does he do? In Judaism is majority rule. So there's 3 big rabbis we spoke about. We spoke about the Rambam, Maimonides. We spoke about the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak of Alfas, and the Rosh, the Torah's father. So he takes those 3, the big 3, and he sees whenever there's an argument, he just does majority rule. What's the problem? 2 of them are Sephardi rabbis, one of them's a hybrid. So this is really not encompassing Ashkenazi teaching. So there's a lot of arguments. There's another Jew at the time. His name is the Ramah, Rabbi. His name was the Ramah. His name was Rabbi Moshe Isserlich. I'm gonna show the video about him soon. He is writing a book, a similar book, taking the tour, writing Ashkenazi law. And then as he's about to finish, they bring him the Beit Yosef's book. Now we have two.
In 1492, the mass expulsion of Jews in the Spanish Inquisition created waves of refugees throughout Europe and the Middle East. As Sephardic Jews from Spain intermingled with Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe, people became confused about which traditions and rules to follow. Two rabbis rose to settle the matter. Though these two men were from different traditions and never even met, their conflict and collaboration defined Judaism for half a millennium. The Jewish oral tradition represents the collected wisdom of rabbis over thousands of years, interpreting the Torah, arguing, and building consensus on what it means to be Jewish. These rules, called Halachah, cover everything from prayers and festivals to dietary and marriage guidelines to procedures in court. They defined and shaped the entirety of Jewish life for millions of people. But by the start of the 16th century, the tradition was in trouble. Disputes between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, arguments between rabbis about the correct opinions, an explosion of new interpretations of the Torah, and a rise in spiritualist philosophies like Kabbalah meant that nobody could agree which opinions were right or which rules to follow. In 1522, Rabbi Yosef Karo decided to fix this. Born in Spain 4 years before the expulsion of the Jews, Karo eventually settled in Sfat, a holy city near the Sea of Galilee. A mystic and a scholar, Rabbi Karo spent 20 years compiling 32 different Jewish authorities into a catalog of Jewish law that he called the Beit Yosef. When there was disagreement, as there frequently was, he went with majority rule between the three most prominent scholars, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. Although the Beit Yosef was a work of astonishing scholarship, it was also very, very long. So Rabbi Karo created a summary that listed the decisions from the Beit Yosef, defining once and for all what he called the fixed final law. It was like spark notes for 2,000 years of Jewish oral tradition. Rabbi Karo called it the Shulchan Aruch, Hebrew for a set table. While many Jewish scholars embraced the brilliance and utility of the Shulchan Aruch, a fierce backlash arose. Prominent rabbis decried Karo for streamlining Jewish law and disregarding the disagreements that were a central feature of Halachah. Others protested that Karo's choice to go with majority rule between two Sephardic rabbis and only one Ashkenazi rabbi strongly favored Sephardic interpretations, a serious problem for Ashkenazi Jews who were not willing to give up hundreds of years of unique customs. Luckily for Ashkenazi Jews, Rabbi Karo wasn't the only scholar working on a unified code of Halachah. Rabbi Moses Isserlis was a brilliant scholar of Torah who founded a yeshiva in Krakow, Poland. He too recognized that the oral tradition had become overly confusing. While Rabbi Karo was writing the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Isserlis was compiling Ashkenazi Halachah into a book titled the Darkei Moshe. He was nearly finished with his masterpiece when Karo's Shulchan Aruch arrived in Poland. The Shulchan Aruch created a dilemma for Rabbi Isserlis. Publishing the Darkei Moshe would reassert Ashkenazic tradition, but exacerbate the chaos of contradictory rulings. He faced a difficult choice: accept Rabbi Karo's conclusions and lose centuries of Ashkenazi traditions, or publish a competing book and risk a schism. Rabbi Isserlis instead came up with a third approach. Recognizing that Jewish unity was essential, Rabbi Isserlis abandoned the Darkei Moshe and instead used his knowledge to create a series of additions to Rabbi Karo's work. Since Karo had called his text the set table, Isserlis called his additions the mapah, or tablecloth. For any laws in the Shulchan Aruch that were different for Ashkenazis, Isserlis added glosses that explained the variances. Thus, Rabbi Isserlis preserved the Ashkenazi tradition without creating disunity. Isserlis then printed the Shulchan Aruch with both Karo's original text and his additions, consolidating the two traditions into one book. By abandoning his own book and instead combining his knowledge with Rabbi Karo's, Rabbi Isserlis guaranteed the continuation of the Ashkenazi tradition while lending his wisdom to the combined text. This new Shulchan Aruch, complete with its tablecloth, quickly became the definitive text on Jewish law, a text that united Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews. It was studied in yeshivas around the world, and later scholars added additional glosses and commentaries, placing their own dishes on the table that Rabbi Karo set. It remains a guiding light, a constitution of the Jewish people, nearly as important as the Torah or the Talmud. The story of the Shulchan Aruch represents the best of Jewish tradition. It marks a dedication to scholarship, combined with an appreciation of practicality, a unified text that still incorporates disagreement, and a recognition that, at the end of the day, working together makes us all stronger.
All right, so let me unpack that a little bit. So you have, this is before we continue, I'm gonna go through a vicious cycle that goes on in Judaism. So you have someone that compiles code. The problem with the code is there's no reasons. So you need commentary to give us the reasons. So then there's commentary. There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of commentary. What happens when there's too much commentary? It's too abundant. No one knows it all. You need to make a new code. So the Beit Yosef and Rabbi Moshe Israelish, they are the first two to come up with a solution. The Beit Yosef writes commentary over here in the Torah telling us what is Jewish, what is how he gets to the law. Then he makes a spark notes called the Shulchan Aruch. This has both. So this also has the code of Jewish law. So over here is the actual code. So the middle would be, the middle is going to be the Beit Yosef right here. Then if you see over here, there's those Rashi letters, a different type of Jewish letters. That is the Israel. Who is he?
I thought Carol and Israel made a combination.
Yeah, so this is a combination of the two. So it says note. You see over there?
So
Over this
Carol gets a separate listing, but
no, Israel. Here's Cairo. This is Rabbi Yosef of Cairo.
Okay.
Over here is Rabbi Israelis.
Oh, they do
It's a
these
different.
get separate.
It's a different font, but they're in the middle. So now,
Spark notes like Cliff Notes?
yeah, Cliff Note. Yeah,
Yeah, okay, just,
Spark Notes is like a website that has all Cliff Notes of all the books.
okay.
This is made for youth. This video, I just thought it was very educational. I've added it. So what happens is you have this combination of the two. So you have the code, you have a new code going on. What happens? No one needs to agree with them because they're not Talmud. They're, in the end of the day, they have sources, but their sources are based on conclusions, based on rabbis before them's conclusions, which who said those rabbis were correct. So what happens is, if you see in the Shulchan Aruch over here, it's called the big Shulchan Aruch, you have a ton. No, that's not a great page. Right here. You have a little bit of them too, and there's so much more on the page. So what's going on? So the answer is that you have all these other opinions writing commentary saying, this is a problem, we don't agree with this, we don't agree with that. And they're going through, and it's a whole discussion on the paper. So it actually gets very, very, very complicating. So what happens when something gets very, very complicating? We need another code. So the next code is actually written by, it's called the Shulchan Aruch Harav. I took an old print to see how it was originally made. This is how it looks on the inside. Very basic. There's actually, told today, there's no real commentary written on it. Why not? Because what did he do? He takes it all and he just pretty much says, this is a law, this is a law, that's a law. And he writes down in his footnotes, but he takes all discussion and common practice of Jews at the time and incorporates that in. This is the first Rebbe of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe. He writes a Shulchan Aruch, but it's also very, very long because he writes reasons. In his Shulchan Aruch, he puts the reasons. There's a rule. You don't get the mitzvah of learning Torah unless you're learning the laws of the Torah with their reasons. So if you learn the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, all the reasons are in there. So it's so much easier to learn because
Does he call his Shulchan Aruch?
It's called Shulchan Aruch. It's called the Shulchan Aruch Harav. The Harav. So this is a small Shulchan Aruch. Most of it was burnt in a fire. We have very little of it, actually. Then, continuing on, there's another book I have one over here. This is called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. This is called the Small Shulchan Aruch. This is how it looks on the inside. It is no reasons. Very basic. The third Rebbe of Chabad, that Tzemach Tzedek, I mentioned him earlier. When the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch came out, it's a new Jewish book. He wanted to read it. He buys it. But he's like, this is not a book to have. So he puts it on the bottom shelf. And then a few years later, his son sees it on a higher shelf and asks his father, why do you put it up on a higher shelf? He said, what can I do that the Jewish people accepted this book? The problem with having a code is you can't extrapolate law from code because code is very specific. So you have to go back to the source. So that the Beit Yosef, at least he gave us his sources. So we could extrapolate not from the wording of his code, but from his sources, we could see how he got through everything he knew. So basically, you have this vicious cycle going on. You have a new code. It's only for the moment. So when there's new laws, there's new questions. That's why when certain things arise, like right now, there's something called synthetic meat. I saw a whole article about it before the class. I started reading an article about synthetic meat, not plant-based meat. They grow the cells and make real meat. Can you eat that with cheese? They take cells of meat and they grow fake meat they grow fake meat, but it's cells of a cow. They grew the meat from cells of a cow.
They grow it in a factory.
They grow it in a factory, and not in a factory, in like a lab. And now, can that meat be eaten with cheese? Because it's meat-based meat. It's no vegan would eat this, right?
Yeah.
But is it considered meat or not? So most rabbis hold not, but there's no consensus about that. In 100 years from now, there might be consensus. When electricity came out, are you allowed to use a microphone on Shabbat? Now nobody uses a microphone. But at the time, people had to figure that out. When Coca-Cola was invented, I think there's a rabbi, his name was...
Wait, we can use the microphone on Shabbat?
You can't.
Yeah,
Look,
And the rabbis say that.
look at page 150. You have all these questions. So Atlantin, there's a Rabbi Tobias Geffen. He writes a whole article. Is Coca-Cola kosher? Thank God it is, by the way. Otherwise, how would we get diabetes?
Where is it? I got page
150. Yeah, you see this map with all these questions everywhere? So look at Johannesburg. Look at the map of the world, Johannesburg. This is a great question. What blessing is chocolate? We all make shahakol. But first you have to learn how chocolate's made if you want to know what the blessing is. So you have this all responses, and then eventually you have code. So you also have these mini codes that have been made throughout history. Like the laws of brachot, the laws of kosher. You have these small books people put out, but a code encompassing the whole Jewish law since the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. There's never been a book so expansive like this one.
The Kitzur.
The Kitzur, yeah. This goes through everything.
Is that generally agreed upon by all the war?
Yes. Yes, generally. There is this one, for instance, sometimes there are some minor details are not agreed upon, but generally it's agreed upon. So throughout history, the rabbis will argue, and then the next generation, there'll be a consensus about the matter. Right now, I'll just tell you a great example of this. In the city of Crown Heights, Brooklyn, they put an eruv. An eruv is a mechanism to allow you to carry on Shabbat. A lot of the rabbis don't agree with that. They think it's not kosher, it's not possible. So you have this whole back and
What on Shabbat?
to allow you to carry something called an eruv. So
I don't know what a carry is.
to carry, you can't. I don't carry on Shabbos.
You can't carry anything.
Okay.
You can take it back, right?
The city of
Make a marking on the sidewalk, on the street, then you can't.
the urging of Chabad, put an arrow.
Yes.
So
So-
that the Jews who go to a Chabad house on Kenwood Street in Agora Hills can walk and carry. And push baby cars and so forth.
Yes.
Shabbos.
So that's very common in Jewish communities, but sometimes
Towns got that arrow.
there's discussion. So then eventually it gets. Right now, there's no consensus, but there will be consensus probably eventually. Either at one point we'll decide it's kosher, it's not kosher. There'll be a certain consensus as time moves on. Whoever has the stronger facts, usually truth lives on forever. So whoever gets closer to the facts will have truth. So I want to go into
Dovid?
one second.
I'm just getting clarity, so for babies, you can't carry a baby on Shabbat?
No, not outside of your property.
So they made it in the Crown Heights, like the property is everything together, like
Yeah,
you're not out of the house. I heard about that. I
but
wanted to
no one,
like-
but not most people don't use it because there's no consensus about it yet. Yes, Alan, you had a question?
Here's a quick question. Israelis's book, is that found anywhere? Or I know he hid it somewhere, right?
Yes, under the tour, I showed you the first book I showed you with the Bet Yosef on the side. He writes a lot shorter. It's on the bottom, the Darchei Moshe, and then he incorporate. It's all incorporated in. If you buy, if you have a big, it'll be found
His
inside.
book that he wrote, though, he hid it, right? Or didn't he hide it somewhere?
No, he didn't hide it.
Okay.
Not the Darchei Moshe, but I think his original Shulchan Aruch, because he was writing a code of Jewish law as well, that he hid and that we don't have. But this video honestly is a bit oversimplified. There's some things which I don't think are factually correct in there, but for the general picture, it was great.
Yeah, the picture.
Yeah,
I've been studying the Aden Steinsaltz
Talmud.
edition of the Talmud.
Yeah.
is that, where does that fit in?
That's a commentary on the Talmud. That's a commentary
That's just his opinion,
on Talmud.
yeah. But well, compared to the Kitzur Shulchan.
Oh, it's totally, that's apples and oranges. That's
Okay.
different genre in general. All right, so I want to get into a very, very interesting discussion of halachic discussion. So you have something called the Pekuach Nefesh principle. I am holding right now on page, I skipped a lot of this course, the inside of the course. I'm holding right now on page 160. So the Pekuach Nefesh principle. The Pekuach Nefesh principle is that there are certain things, there's a certain what's the value of a Jewish life? So let's look at text 5. What's the value of a Jewish life? That God, text 5 says, God created a human in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So a man is created in the image of God. Let's go right away to text 6. It says as follows. How were the 10 commandments given? 5 on one tablet, 5 on the other tablet. One tablet, and on one tablet, it says, I am the Lord your God. On the opposite, on the other tablet, it says, do not murder. This teaches us anyone who spills blood, the Torah considers it as if he diminished the stature of the Almighty. Basically, this is killing a Jewish life that's pretty crazy. It's as if you're kind of killing God in a certain sense.
Mhm.
So that's the value of a Jewish life in regards to one killing another person, a fellow. Now let's continue. It says the Shmartim is the next text 8, text 5. All right, I should be going now with the slideshow. Text 7, it says as follows. In text 7, it says, this is from the Talmud. It says, you shall keep my statutes and my laws, which a person shall do and live with them. I am God. Sorry, it's not from the Talmud. This is from Leviticus. This is what it says. So what do we learn from this? In text 8, that's from the Torah. Now the Talmud is a Talmud learned from this. It learns as follows. With all transgressions of the Torah, if a person is told transgress, so you shall not be killed, they should transgress rather than be killed. For the Torah states, live by them, not die by them. God wants us to be alive. So a great example for this, if someone has a heart attack on Shabbos, you should call the ambulance. Don't say, oh, it's Shabbos. It's actually, if someone does that, they're an idiot and they are actually, it's a major transgression because you're supposed to live, not supposed to die. So now as a result of this, here's the next law. Now that we know that Judaism wants us to live, or a living religion wants us to live for God, not to die for God, here comes a very, very interesting law. Text 9, this is a Mishnah. It says as follows. If a collapsed building falls on someone on Shabbat, even if it is doubtful whether they are there or they are not there, and furthermore, it is doubtful whether they are alive or dead, we must clear the rubble heap from them. If the person is found alive, we continue clearing the rubble. So what happens? A building collapses. And this is someone that goes to shul once a week. Or this is a guy that goes to 1 week to one shul, 1 week to other shul. His house collapses. So now nobody knows if he went to shul that week. So they go, one shul, they say, here his house collapsed. They should start digging to try to find him. Maybe his body's there, because maybe if he's alive, this is worth it to break Shabbos in order to find him. And let's say they start finding him and they realize he's alive, they should continue digging to make sure to get him out. So now the Talmud asks a very, very interesting question. Look at text 10. The Talmud asks, the Mishnah states, if the person is found alive, we continue clearing the rubble. Isn't this obvious? This needs to be stated in order to tell us that we continue our efforts, even if the case the person is mortally wounded and can only live a short while. Let us say the guy will live an extra hour if we pull him out of the rubble, or he'll die in the next 5 minutes. What do? Do we break Shabbos for that or not? So actually, Jewish law will tell us they can pull him out, even if we give him a little bit of extra life, because life is that important. So this is the importance of life in Judaism, because God warned us, God is alive, and we're in the image of God, so we are supposed to be alive. Let's continue. Now, let's take this principle a step further. Text 11. This is from the Rif. Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, he writes as follows. He says, a dying person has the legal status of a living person in every respect, as it is written, not until the silver cord snaps. One who touches a dying person in any way that hastens their death is a murderer. The value of life is so extreme that even if someone's for sure going to die, and if you, let's say, put their hand, you close their eyes, they'll just die. In movies, the guy's dying and the son says bye to their father and puts the eyes down, that is considered murder according to Torah. You're a murderer if you do that, even though the person is for sure going to die. And now, based on the value of life, so this is all because of, I just want to point out, we're learning all these different laws from one base concept, and now these are all the laws that can be extrapolated as a result of this. So now look at text 12. Here's a story. A person comes before Rava. There's a story in the Talmud. A person comes before Rava and says as follows. The chieftain of my village said to me, kill so-and-so, and if you do not do so, I will kill you. Rava said to him, let yourself be killed rather than kill than you should kill. Why do you think that your blood is redder than theirs? Perhaps the blood of that person is redder. So let's unpack this a little bit.
But isn't it also a halachah that if someone rises up to kill you, rise up and kill them first? That's Rambam.
Yes, that's actually in the Talmud as well.
I guess that it's just not wrong passive.
No, because over here, how are you going to save your own? So if you could kill the chieftain, go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
But we're obviously talking about that's not an option. He has two options. Let's go throughout history. You have two options. Either kill your fellow Jew, or we will kill you. They have a gun to his head.
Kill the guy making the threat.
No, so they have a gun to his head. And they say either he has 7 guns to his head. And he says, either you shoot that person or we're going to kill you. So now, should he shoot that person and survive?
Shoot the criminal.
What if that's not an option?
Then you get killed. At least you do something good before you go.
All right.
I'm just to passively say, okay, kill me.
Yeah, so first of all, the right to bear arms.
That's not what Rambam says. Rambam says, rise up and kill him before.
That's if you have the opportunity to do so. This is a case you don't have the opportunity. This is a very specific case. So what goes on over here? So Rashi explains the case a little bit. Let's look in text 13. This whole blood is redder. What does this mean? So Rashi, he's a commentary on the Talmud. He says as follows. Rava is saying, your premise is that every mitzvah is set aside in order to preserve a life. So you think that also this mitzvah, i.e. the prohibition against murder, should be set aside in order to preserve your life. But this transgression is different from other transgressions in that in any case, there will be loss of life. The Torah only allowed the mitzvot to be set aside because of the preciousness of a Jewish life. But who says your life is more precious to God's eyes than the other person's life? Perhaps that person's life is more precious, which the result that a transgression will be committed and his life will also be lost. So that's what Rava is telling him, that Pekuach Nefesh is great. That's only if you're the only life at stake. But if you're going to actively kill someone else as a result of your decision, you're actively killing someone else with your own hands, that is wrong. Yes.
In the case of an abortion, if it's going to kill the mom, would it be okay to kill the?
Yes, without a question. In the appendix, we don't get into this, but I think it gets into it a little bit. I'm not going to get into it tonight. So let us continue. So we have
all of this is Pekuach Nefesh.
Yes. We took that original principle and then we're going to apply it and we're going to get more and more abstract. Ron, right now I'm getting more and more abstract as we go. If you don't realize, I'm trying to show you how far you can stretch this principle, and the more farther you go, the more controversial it's going to get. So over here, we say that you're not allowed, if you are given the option to kill or be killed, you are not allowed to kill in order to survive. Now, the Talmud gives text 14, the Talmud gives a very, very interesting story. Story goes as follows. 2 people are traveling. One of them has a jug of water. If they both drink, both will die of thirst. If only one drinks, he will make it a settled place, he'll survive. Ben Petora expounded, better. He expounded, better that both should drink and die than one should witness the death of the other. But then Rabbi Akiva came and taught, the Torah states, your brother shall live with you. Your life comes before the life of your fellow. So now we see this principle gets into an argument because it's a pretty abstract case. You're walking down the streets, you're in the desert, and you have a jug of water. It's exactly 24 hours worth of water. You have 24 hours of walking to go. So you have two people. So if both of you drink, you both die. If one of you drink, one of you will survive, another one will die. So the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, which Rabbi Akiva says, your life comes first. So the question is, how is this different than our case of our first case of Rabbi, the case of the murderer? He says, you kill or I will kill you. Why is this different? So
Akiva sounds very much like Rambam. When I was quoting a moment ago.
So here, right now, there's from the Shita Mikubetes, text 15, he'll explain the difference. Regarding the case of two travelers, where the law is that one who has the water may drink in order to save their own life, based on the principle, your life comes before the life of your fellow, it would seem, however, that if one of them grabbed the water away from the other one and drank it, causing the other to die, that person is guilty in the eyes of heaven. He's a murderer.
Wait, he's saving his own life.
By actively, I have a jug of water. So if you steal it from me in order to save your own life, and in the end I die, you are a murderer. That's completely.
I'm living.
That is the definition of that's the worst type of jerk you could be. You kill someone in order to survive. That's not a great, what's your life worth at that point? You're a jug of great. So if you're a murderer at the end of the day. And also you could live as a result. I'm sure there's a lot of you're a murderer. You did save yourself, but you have to be a murderer because you stole my jug of water.
Right.
So that person will be guilty in the eyes of heaven. As the principle, you should not think that your blood is redder. Why do you think your blood is redder would apply to this case?
I want to survive. I want my water.
So basically, we see a very interesting principle. When you are taking action, you're not allowed to take action in order to survive, to kill someone else. When you're taking action, you see in Jewish law, I'm not allowed to actively kill you to survive if you're not a threat to my life. You're not a direct threat to my life.
If you are a threat,
Then I can kill you. If you're not a threat to my life, I'm not allowed to take action to kill you. So, but if I'm allowed to be passive and allow you to die, if that's going to allow me to live, meaning, let us say with the jug of water, I happen to have water. So if I don't give you, I'll survive and you will die.
Right.
So I'm passively allowing you to die, and that is okay. That is okay. So now, as a result of this principle, if we go to text 16.
David,
Yes.
I just have a quick question. So if you decide that you want to give the other person water because you don't want to see them die, is that against the halachah or not?
And you allow yourself to die and him live?
No, if you want to split it, if you decide you want to split it because you don't.
And both die?
You feel bad about it. You feel bad about it.
That'd be wrong.
Okay.
That'd be wrong.
But can you give it to him?
You could, there is such a thing of Mesiras Nefesh that you could, if you, for whatever reason, you want to sacrifice your own life for the second person. So that possibly could be allowed, but definitely that if you have water, you want to give it to me because you feel I'm younger and I have more of a life ahead of me. That is an option, but you cannot, I definitely would not be in, if we were in the scenario together, Alan, I would definitely not be allowed to grab the water from you. And as well as if we split it, that would be not allowed either.
Wait, if you, so you have the jug of water. Before I take it, or. If we split, you have half, I have half,
We both die
how you gonna die if you're drinking water?
because we have another 12 hours to go and there's only 1 cup of water. So we both split the cup 50-50. We're both gonna die of thirst.
So if I take the cup from you, push you away, drink the water, I live, you die.
You're a murderer.
But I live because I have the water.
Great.
I win.
Yeah, great. So you survived being a murderer. And I'm saying it's a very you survived immorally. That's a very immoral thing you did, though. That's an unnoble thing to do. So if generally people that their lives are worth generally people that live straightforward lives are not in these moments are not afraid of death. When people are only afraid of death when they feel their life is worthless. So the more it's actually ironic. So the more your wife is worth something, the more you'll be willing to give it up for your fellow person. The less you feel your life is worth, the more you'll end up murdering your friend in order to survive.
So if I let you drink the water, I perish, you live, I die, that sucks.
It does. And sometimes humans sacrifice sometimes. And sometimes if I have the water.
Really good water.
All right, let's continue. Text 16. So now there's another case. This is in the Jerusalem Talmud. If a group of people are traveling on the road and they encounter heathens who say to them, "Give us one of you that we may kill him, otherwise we kill you all." Even all of them, even if all of them will be killed, they should not hand over a single Jewish soul. So let's say they say, you guys, you hand me over one of you guys, we'll kill him, otherwise we'll kill all of you. So now
That's Rambam's case with multiple parties.
So now
That's the one I brought up before.
So now what do? The Jews say there's 1,000 soldiers surround them, say, we'll want to kill one of you. But you say, so if they tell one guy, you pick who dies, you pick who dies, we can't do that. But if one guy volunteers himself, he says, I'll die to save everyone. Great. He just performed the mitzvah of Mesirut Nefesh, giving up his life for a fellow Jew. He becomes a martyr. But if someone else chooses for him, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to turn someone in order to make your fellow Jew die. So now I'm going to veer off. Not off topic. I'm going off script again. So the slideshow is essentially over. Actually, I'm going to go here. Okay. So now there's a very, very interesting in the world of academia. There is a very, very interesting case. It's called one second. There's a very interesting case. It's called the trolley. The case of the trolley. Thought I had it here. Let me pull it up so I get it exactly right. No mistakes.
Trolley, or is it true?
The trolley problem. So basically there's a case. There's a trolley going down the hill, and there are 5 people tied down on one track where it's taking its natural course. You could change the course of the trolley through sending it left, and it'll kill. There's one person tied to that track, and you'll end up killing one person instead of the 5. Which one is the right thing to do?
I think I'll kill one person.
So in some senses of some parts of to kill the 1 is called altruism. So you're gonna go and you're gonna move the trolley to kill. To kill the 5 is called
You know what political party they are?
deontology. It wouldn't make it does you don't know, or you do know. It's one of the five are the ones you hate, the one is the one you love, or vice versa. What I know. You're trying to say it doesn't make a difference. So now, there's actually when I was in yeshiva, we watched the video about this. How many people would move it was a simulation. How many people would move the track to kill the one instead of the five?
Which is the right answer? Kill the 5.
So
Eat the 1.
One of the blank spaces after 1 and 2 going to show.
Okay, what's 3?
So here are the two halachic precedents are like as follows. Yeah. The two halachic precedents are as follows. Number one is that you're not allowed to ever take action in order to take someone's life, but you're allowed to refrain from saving another to save oneself. Okay, so I'm gonna actually just get out of this because this is a different anyhow. So here is the about our trolley problem. Here's an article I found that explains a halachic response that goes through it. So I'm going to read it word for word.
Copy those 2 principles.
Discuss the trolley and based on above halacha. So there's halacha. So based on halacha, there's halacha that what you just said. If a group of Jews are traveling and a group of non-Jews chance upon them and then hand over one from the group and will kill you all, even if all will be killed, you may not hand over a soul. So this rabbi, his name is Rabbi Yehuda Waldenberg. He lived in from 1915 to 2006. So he says as follows: that based on the above halacha, that one cannot actively cause a person to die, even if it will save many more. As earlier commentaries explained, that the Talmud statement that one should let himself be killed rather than killed another, for why do you think that your blood is redder, is essentially saying that we cannot fathom the infinite value of a life, the infinite value of a life. Thus, we must refrain from taking action, and that applies. We know how to evaluate one life over another, or even many. All we can do is leave it to heaven and follow the Talmudic dictum, Shav va'al tasa, sit and do nothing, taking a passive tack. For any active killing is forbidden. So the halachic answer to the trolley problem would be, let the 5 die, because you are not God.
So I was right.
Yes,
Alright.
you are not God. So,
I mean, if we exaggerate and said there are 100 yeshiva boys on the track, and there's one ISIS person who's a known murderer.
is he Jewish?
No.
If he's not Jewish, then run over him. And also, if he's a murderer, run over him because he deserves to die.
Yeah.
If someone
But he
deserves,
is Jewish one.
someone
Just-
deserves.
okay, I'm asking you.
No, if
there's
someone-
exceptions.
If someone deserves to die, you can actively kill him, or you can actually send him to die.
Protect someone that doesn't deserve to die.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just asking, so okay,
So
there's
you
clarity on that.
literally have to
1
find
second.
your way to save a Jew, kill a Palestinian.